But we're going to move on a bit from there to, well, all of these other films so far have been the first film in a series or not part of a series at all. Whereas, into not just the first sequel, but the second sequel in a series that I'm going to give away my feelings a bit. Definitely suffering from diminishing returns. And Robert Rodriguez's Once Upon a Time in Mexico, Scott.
Yes, as you say, the third of his Mexican bullet ballet sees, well, to be honest, a lot of things happening at once with very loose relations to each other. More on which later, but again, this means it doesn't quite lend itself to neat, succinct recaps, but try this on for size. Antonio Banderas' Mariachi just wants to live a quiet life after the death of Salma Hayek's Carolina at the hands of Gerardo Vigil's evil General Marquez, but he's been drafted in by Johnny Depp's CIA goon, Sheldon Jeffrey Sands, as a hired gun. Marquez himself has been hired by Mexican drug baron Armando Barrillo, played pointlessly by noted non-Latino Willem Dafoe, to take out the president. As the CIA only approves of regime change when they're the ones pulling the strings, Sands wants an oar stuck in that, hence leveraging El Mariachi's past, and also drafting in Ruben Blades' retired FBI agent Jorge Ramirez, who has his own reasons for wanting Barrillo dead. And so it goes, with a whole bunch of plot twists and supporting characters played by the likes of Mickey Rourke, Eva Mendes and Danny Trejo. Now, I didn't have particularly fond memories of In Mexico, at least insofar as I had any memories of it at all. However, for the first half of the film, I thought perhaps I'd been mistaken. It had been a while since I last watched a Robert Rodriguez film, and his blend of action and visuals are still a quite enjoyable thing to watch. However, the second half of the film just falls entirely off the rails. I suppose the essential reason why we're watching it, the action, remains fine, and it continues apace, but why any of this is happening is soon lost in a mess of setups, double crosses, revelations and betrayals and the like, mostly happening to characters that you've barely met and therefore aren't all that bothered about.
Exactly, thank you.
Now, these convolutions are apparently by design, but all that goes to show is that achieving a goal and a goal being worth achieving are not necessarily the same thing. Through all of this, Johnny Depp floats around, alternately instigating or explaining things to no great effect, occasionally arbitrarily killing people for no reason, and generally just consuming screen time that ought to have been going to Antonio Banderas' character, who is, after all, the only one that we have any emotional investment in. But he feels like...
And he's barely in it.
He's a bit part character in his own movie. It's really weird. Yeah, so in many ways, this just seems like a budget in search of a story. The shoestring-esque amount that El Mariachi was made for proved to be a mother invention, and the relatively colossal amount, albeit still modest in the grander scheme of Hollywood budgets given to Desperado, allowed for a similar tale to be told with much more style and assurance. With the relatively super colossal mountain of cash that was secured for Mexico, I rather wonder if there was a plan for that money other than more characters, more stunts, more plot lines, more big name, big price tag actors, but what there isn't really is much of a reason to care about anything that's been thrown at you, and this winds up being very much less than the sum of its parts. Now, for all that, I'd still don't actually dislike Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and there's a number of entertaining scenes in there amongst all the success. The problem is, why should I tell you, dear listener, to go and watch this and not El Mariachi or Desperado instead, which are just much better films all round? Mm-hmm. If you want to complete that set, however, I wouldn't necessarily warn you away from it, but it's not in the same league as the earlier outings. And indeed, I wrote most of these notes before rewatching the earlier pair, and I suspect I'd be rather less forgiving towards In Mexico if I'd watched them in order. So, yes, it's a disappointment, as you very much say, very much diminishing to returns by the time you get to this point in the series, and a bit of a downer to kind of dribble that little mini-series out on.
Yes, well, I watched these in order. Once Upon a Time in Mexico's hot garbage. It's appalling. I did not like a single thing about this film. And from things like, well, Danny Trejo was in Desperado, right? Yeah. Mm. And he died in Desperado, right? Yeah. And Danny Trejo, he's not in any way a distinctive looking person. Nobody will remember him. Let's put him back in the film as a different character. No!
Yeah.
And the thing...
There's some precedent for that. I mean, they did have to retrofit Antonio Banderas into the role as Mariachi as well. So.
With Carlos Gallardo, because I think Carlos Gallardo didn't speak English more than anything, was why he wasn't in Desperado as the main character. But I don't know, it's strange to do that, but that's definitely...
It's very much the least of its problems.
Yes, this film's problems. It's definitely got a bit of stunt casting going on.
Yes.
By putting old Henry Churches in, Enrique Iglesias. Also, while, not that he speaks much Spanish in this, but while Antonio Banderas is disguising his Spanish accent, Enrique Iglesias isn't.
Yes.
So he's not selling himself as a Mexican at all. It's, yeah, I just find the kind of, like, both the Johnny Depp and the script are trying way too hard to be kooky and quirky.
Yeah.
And it does not work. It's like, oh, here's my thing, I order this puerco pibil everywhere, and then I'll go and kill the chef. Haha. And, yeah, nah, it's not good. As mentioned, the stunt cast, and you mentioned too, and I'm glad you did, Scott, about like being asked to care about people or characters or situations when they've not been in it at all.
Yeah.
Willem Dafoe, who for some reason is a villain, despite also, while being American, also barely in the film, really.
Yeah.
Mickey Rourke as his barely in the film enforcer. Fortunately, Robert Rodriguez made much better use of Mickey Rourke in the Sin City films, proving that while he can do films that are largely style over substance but make them really good at the same time, Sin City films are very enjoyable.
Yeah.
And then there's a scene, it's one that struck me in particular, when Eva Mendes appears and says, "Hey, you didn't see this coming, did you?" You're like, well, no, obviously I didn't see this coming. How could you see this coming? You've been in the film for 37 seconds up to this point.
I don't know who you are.
There's one scene where she's like working for some sort of agency, and she doesn't get the job she wants. And then you see her speak to Johnny Depp, and he says, "Go and do this to get some money." Aye, okay. Then suddenly she's double-crossing him and she's Willem Dafoe's daughter. And what? You're not a character. You can't suddenly have this revelation. Yeah, it's... I don't know. And I didn't even like the action all that much. It just seemed... I don't know. I think I was put off partly by the fact there were some really dodgy effects in there. Like the quality of some sort of plug-in for After Effects kind of quality is in there. But a not an expensive plug-in for After Effects. Like there's a scene on the, I guess it's meant to be some sort of government building. It's the university in Guanajuato, the building with the really steep steps, the kind of pale grey building.
Yeah.
And there's at one point a tank comes along and fires a shell at that, and it looks like real fire behind on the close-up shot. It cuts away to the wide shot, and it's the worst digital fire I have seen in a long time. And there were a few shots like that, like wee bullet pings off of like buildings behind Johnny Depp that probably not so much After Effects plugin, more like really early days of the iPhone effects. You can get wee apps that could do things like that. I don't think it's a competently made film. It's certainly not a competently written film. The biggest problem is though that the mariachi is sidelined in the third film in the mariachi trilogy that's ostensibly about the mariachi. It's very, very strange.
Yes.
And yeah, a large portion of the film is shot in a very beautiful Mexican city called Guanajuato. And because I've been there, I spent a good chunk of the time just seeing if I could recognise places and streets and things, because I was not being captivated by the action at all. I just thought this whole film was hot garbage. Whether I might have been somewhat more forgiving if I hadn't watched it right after the original two films, Scott, I don't know, you think is would have been the case for you. You watched them that way, but...
Yes, but who's going to do that?
Yes.
This was just the way it worked out for me. It's just not the same quality as the other two. Yeah,
and it does... I see what you mean. It's like, yeah, we've got this extra money now. I don't know what to do with this.
Let's try and do everything and achieve nothing. This seems to be what's happened.
It's quite famous, actually, that El Mariachi was made on basically a shoestring budget.
Yeah.
Not as low as some, but a very low budget. And it's probably the best of the three films.
Yeah.
You could maybe argue the toss between that and Desperado, but he was much more limited at that point. But also, you thought, well, Rodriguez his beginnings as a filmmaker kind of show through in that film. He's got quite a few films under his belt now, and then you've got people who you would imagine you could depend on, like Johnny Depp, and it's like, nope, it's terrible all the way down.
Yeah, it's just a mess. Just a mess.
It's a bad film.